So welcome again. We won't have to go through all of that. I'll introduce our speakers. So Adam, just maybe take a minute to introduce yourself. I'll do the same for those who don't know me, and then we'll get right into the materials.
Yeah, my name is Adam, and I've been in technology for 20 years or so. Most recently as a product manager, grew up kind of on the engineering side, and previously have worked with Steven and Dan and a couple of other attendees actually. So I'm excited to be here and talk about what I've been up to with AI.
And my name's Stephen Pollock. A lot of this was driven originally by a website I had created in 2010 called InsideSpin, which if you watch the first instance of this seminar, there's a lot more about that in that one. I've a career technologist, been in the commercial side of the tech sector since grade 11, which is a long time ago. I've had the wonderful experience of witnessing many transformational technologies come and go, or mostly come and stay. So it's been interesting for me to sort of evolve and watch how AI has sort of emerged and taken the path that it has, because there's a lot to learn from that history, which is a lot of why we're doing this particular presentation. So we have quite a few slides. That should be a surprise to anybody who knows me. Adam and I are going to sort of toss it back and forth in terms of the content, make it a bit interactive between us. Please don't hesitate to share your own experiences as we go through the topics. Ideally, we won't run out of time before we get to the end. And then if there's more time, we'll keep talking. And as I said, we'll post this on YouTube. So the takeaways are largely related to the experiences Adam and I have and the perspectives that we want to bring out here on the importance of understanding AI. So we'll just sort of get right into it. I mentioned earlier, a career like mine actually has witnessed all of these transformational technologies. And one of the things that's been interesting for me, almost amusing, I suppose, is as I see the AI hype going on around what it can and can't do and what people are choosing to think about it and how they're choosing to use it, as I reflect on the experiences I had in my working career as these technologies emerged, I see all the same things happening. And that's a good thing from my point of view, because it says that there are some good lessons to learn around AI, and we shouldn't not pay attention to the past learnings in order to know what to do next. Because if we're not careful, maybe unlike some of the other technologies, we might inject AI into places in our world where it's going to be a lot harder to disengage it from, different than switching database technologies or how you might have deployed the World Wide Web. Those kind of settled in fairly reasonable places. But I think AI does have some risk that it will get used incorrectly. So I wanted to share that just from my point of view, given my background and all the things that I've seen happen and all of the sort of textbook stuff that people are going to have to go through. Those are surfacing within AI, and ideally we'll learn from those and accelerate getting to where all this needs to be faster so we can get the fantastic benefits it offers. There's 5 takeaways that we have for today. So our presentation mostly focuses on each of these, making sure everybody understands how AI works. I think this particular audience probably already has a good understanding of parts of it. But we did find it's important that we share a mental model that we'd like everybody to just keep in mind. It's a bit simplistic, but it's a mental model nonetheless. And that helps us with the rest of the materials. So when we get to that in the first part, hopefully that'll be obvious. The second one, which is probably one of the more interesting ones, is how do we encourage acceptance of AI in our work products? And why that's important is there's lots of evidence already that if you say, I created this with AI, it doesn't look like you get any credit for that. And not that you need credit, but the content has to have credibility. And today we're more used to work products coming from people than we are from technology. So if we're not careful here and correctly embody how to cause AI to be accepted within the workplace and in the day-to-day lives of everything we do, we're going to have real problems. I was talking with somebody who was sharing their experiences. They work for an investment analyst company, and they've already decided they cannot say that some of their advice to their investor community or the client community is based on AI, because then why would they pay for them in that particular case? AI is technology with a lot of sharp edges. So we're just going to share a couple of sort of fun stories about all the idiosyncrasies of AI. If you followed any of my posts, I've talked about my experiences show that ChatGPT can be a bit bipolar. So, in my mind, that just means it swings back and forth between right and wrong, and directionally heading me where I want to when I'm using it to explore different things. So it's important to know that it can do that. A lot of people giggle when they hear that, but actually it's very important to understand how it works in order to know how to fight that, so that when you're working with it, the output it gives you is in fact something that's useful. Adam and I have talked a lot about this, and I've also talked a lot with other people about it. The product manager's role, is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest candidate for wide-scale AI adoption in a typical company. And there's a number of people writing about, including me, the idea of flipping the 80-20 rule, which, if you could do that for a product manager, would dramatically impact the contribution they can make to their business. If you could go from one product manager to 5 without any new cost and still achieve at least the same outcome, if not better outcomes, typically businesses would be way better given the responsibilities product managers often have. So we sort of single that one out as a role. Obviously, every role could use it, and there are lots of strong candidates for other roles. But given this audience, we pick product. And the last is, don't wait for technology like AI to settle before adopting. It has this interesting artifact. Everybody has a way to use it. Unlike cloud computing, my wife's a photographer. She would have had no use for cloud computing, virtualization, or relational databases, but she could use ChatGPT, DALL-E, and a whole bunch of other things for her work in photography. So it has an interesting artifact, unlike some of the other transformational technologies, is it can be used by everybody. So we're going to cover these. These are our 5 sections, and we're hopefully going to not run out of time. Let's get started. So where this project started, and this is more about me, this project started, strangely enough, in 1988, where I had a single conversation with somebody I used to work for named Peter Edison, and we were musing about how paper documentation is such a waste for companies to produce. I worked for a company called Fulcrum Technologies. We were one of the early purveyors of search engines in the marketplace, and our product was an API with software developer kits. And we had 10 manuals. It was like a rack this big that we would have to maintain and hand out to our customers. And of course, we're updating things all the time, so it was a challenge given it was all in print. But we also understood that very little of it was ever used. So we just mused, wouldn't it be great if you could publish everything on demand? As somebody went from the table of contents to go get to a page, or an index to go get to a page, that page would somehow appear in that book. We would know to write it, and we wouldn't bother writing the ones that nobody gets to. So, we giggled about that in 1988, and off I went on my working career. When I left PlateSpin, I put together the InsideSpin site, and I remembered that conversation, and I said, I have about 120 to 150 articles I want to put on the website, but I don't have time to write them all. So what I'm going to do is write the summaries of all of them, but only write the detail of about half of them. And what I'm going to do is, when someone clicks on the summary, I'm going to get a message in my inbox saying, hey, person ABC wants to see the rest of this document. And I'll use that as my prompt to go and write the rest of the document. And when enough of those requests come in, I'll take a day or two to go write that article, and I patted myself on the back for that cleverness. So I have a whole database of clicks going back now about 15 years of where people have gone off the end of those summaries to look at the rest of the article and don't see it. So that was 2010. As I headed into this year, when I look at AI, my big project was, hey, this is interesting. Now I actually have that opportunity when someone clicks on a summary to use AI as an authoring tool to help create a default article, as good as AI could produce, but an article nonetheless. And as long as I feed it enough of my thoughts and my ideas about the technology sector, the article would be somewhat consistent with the rest of the website. So I embarked on that. It's my proof of concept, and it's what was the genesis of the first presentation I did before talking to Adam a couple weeks ago. And now a lot more work has gone on, and I've combined it with things Adam has done, which he'll talk about. So this is sort of the whole thing. What if we could only publish what is used? I'm really tired. I wish on-demand could be a thing, so I don't have to keep writing the books. I was one of the big authors for these books, and we won a number of awards for them, but we know they mostly sat on the shelf, and actually have a copy here. Experience helped realize success. So when I came out of PlateSpin, that was sort of the impetus of putting together the website. But as I said at the time, I wasn't going to write 150 articles right out of the bat. So I went through this exercise, and now I'm getting to the completion of this website where I can use AI to generate all the articles. So I've learned a lot of things, some surprising, some not, and we'll see them all come out as we go through it. So that's the impetus of this. And if you go to InsideSpin.com, you'll see some of those examples. And in the deck here, I have a couple of screen captures of some of the things I've done and the approach I've used to do the integration. And if you want to talk about it offline, if you're creating or managing or responsible for documentation in any form, I think I've actually got a very interesting model that can be applied to that problem to take a lot of cost out of documentation and improve the effectiveness of it if you use AI in a certain way. So I had a bunch of goals. I'm not going to read all this. A lot of challenges that were interesting. It's an older website. I didn't want to spend a lot of time revamping it, so I stuck with the infrastructure that was on the website, of which Adam and Dan always laugh at me about. I had to, go back and look at my material and make some judgment calls about where I could best fit it in. I added a whole new section about AI to the website, which is the first new section I've added since it was originally formed. And I've been busy working on those particular articles, and they've become some of the fodder for how to do the AI integration. A lot more work to do, and a lot of it has to do with just creating the best version of the article that could be created, so it still represents the essence of the value of InsideSpin. So a lot of things here to look at. As I say, we don't have time to sort of go through them all, so I'm not going to. So let's get started. First topic, knowing how it works. I'll lead this one, and I'll ask Adam to add in as well a little bit about his learning. So the most interesting part about, I think, AI as a technology is it doesn't work like most people think it works. I think everybody can agree that we're largely thinking about AI as a successor to Google search, and it works, or we think it works in a similar way. But for those who have dug into it a bit, we know it doesn't. And the process that gives it its value seems to also give it a lot of its weaknesses. And if you don't know how it works, you won't know how to surround those weaknesses with the checks and balances that you need in order to overcome them. So I'll start with this. Why understanding AI is important. So it promises to take over routine tasks now and ultimately more complex ones later. So if you don't understand how it works, that would be a big shame to make those decisions and then get caught with things going wrong. So what I've tried to do here is there's sort of an analogy between the idea of hiring people and the idea of deploying AI. I've become quite a fan personally of thinking about AI. Now I'm thinking about it through the ChatGPT and other GPT experiences out there, like it's a resource on a team. I think given you interact with it largely that way, and given a lot of us are working remote, it's really quite similar, then that's a pretty interesting analogy to hold up to force you to think about the decisions on both sides. So if you're going to give it routine tasks, would you go hire a new resource without knowing their capabilities and put them on the job? You probably wouldn't do that. You would want to know what their capabilities are, so that would be important. It's still very early stage, so it will evolve rapidly to deliver more and more capabilities. We wouldn't let a new employee take over a role without some form of probationary period. That's pretty common. So when you put AI in, if you think you're going to do more with it, you have to have a probationary concept established for all of the work products that get created. AI is trained to know what it knows, but we don't find out in its entirety what it knows. We just have been told it's got all the information in the world. Same with a person. We want to know the experiences of anybody we hire so we can judge their contributions. Did they go to Harvard? Do they have a degree? Have they worked for 10 years? Show me some of your past projects. We would do stuff like that when we bring in a new person into our team. So here we are, we're just assuming all the knowledge that's in AI that it's been trained with is the right knowledge for us without question. And that's not really a very sensible thing to do when you sort of step back and realize what the risks are if you deploy it incorrectly. It's inherently designed to create variability in its output so that it appears intelligent or conscious. And I think there's a lot of writing about that. That's sort of, really the breakthrough in the end is it's very interactive. It's actually kind of shockingly interactive. I find when I use ChatGPT, a lot of times I'm really surprised by how it interacts with me and how it asks questions and how it suggests what the successor thing it may want to do for me based on what it just did for me, and it's leading me on different paths. It's a very impressive capability, and I know I'm a career engineer, so I'm impressed. And I studied artificial intelligence at school, so it's still very impressive. But we won't want a worker to repeat tasks multiple times and get different output all the time. We want reliability. That's pretty critical. Obviously, that's different if depending on your job, but for the most part, we want reliability. So if our AI tools and how they're trained and how they all work don't produce reliable output, that's going to be a big problem for us. So we need to understand that. We need to know that. And lastly, it does not crash if poor or unexpected input is provided. It hallucinates, which is a different story here. So in the typical world, of course, if a system fails that we license, whatever it is, you get the the current version of the blue screen of death. In the case of AI, it doesn't actually crash. It just gives you some other output, and it could lie, it could exaggerate. It always feels like it has to go somewhere with whatever you ask. So again, systems crash or report errors or guide users to correct their input. We need to build that in order to meet the system expectations. And we'll get later on into the whole lovely world of prompt engineering where a lot of this comes out. So, whoops. So I'm going to stop there. Adam, I wouldn't mind if you can, share a couple thoughts just to get more voices going here, and tell me what you think.
Yeah, I like your analogy, and I think it's a great one to help people frame it, especially if they're not coming from a technical background. And my experience has been the risk here is in the hallucinations. So if I use ChatGPT to do something, or generative AI in general, we'll just maybe stick with that. If I don't have the technical expertise or any expertise in the material it's generating, it's a big risk because I might try to pass it off, and somebody who knows more about the topic is going to point that out, and lose credibility and all of the negative things that come with that. So when you first talked to me about this model, I liked it as thinking of how would I onboard a co-op, because I've done a lot of that in my career. So yeah, I really like this.
So one of the things, if I can, the interesting benefit for me, and those who have worked with me know this well, if you have a model like this in your head, you can draw on all the conventional experience you have. If you think about creating a plan for a business around how we're going to bring AI in, and you bring out your onboarding process for a new employee and you adapt it to AI, you'll get quite far with that. That's a good approach. You don't have to look at AI as some little orphan thing that needs its own solution. There's obviously a different detail than bringing on a new employee, but by and large, the criteria you would use to endorse hiring somebody and putting them in their role can very well be applied. So I think this is, for me, has been an interesting, way to think about working with companies who want to bring AI in, and just reminding them that they probably already have plans for how to do it. They just don't realize that yet because they haven't connected that with their normal hiring process of bringing in a resource. Because almost everywhere you go, AI is kind of viewed as a resource. You'll save time, you'll save money, you avoid hiring, unfortunately also replace people. But it's not going to replace people. Like, the job's not needed. The job is still needed, and you still need it to be done at least as well as the person who was there. So the criteria can be established. The one thing, this is for me because I spent 10 years working at a search company, AI is not the same as search. So when you look at it from that point of view, that's become really important because that's where a lot of the variability starts to come out. So without going into too much detail, I think I'll just sort of roll all these out. The simplest difference from my point of view, just totally from a simplicity perspective, is one is based on an index of references and one is based on a training model. And there's quite a big difference there because on the references side, it's very black and white. Things are either in the index or they're not. They're ordered in a certain way or they're not, although it's highly statistical and AI-like in some of the areas when you look at similarity searching and other algorithms. But by and large, it's based on the reality of today's data. In the training model side, it's not necessarily, because it's computing a representation of that knowledge in a way that allows it to execute the prompting quickly, and that's not going to let it be used in the same way as it might if you were building classic search. So you might, if you're, let's say, an early adopter or a basic adopter, or you're at the beginning of your AI journey, you might still be using it like Google Query, which isn't the worst thing. It does have an advantage. It's not giving you a million results for everything that you have to figure out how to sort through. But you don't have to stop there. You can learn more about what it is by thinking about it as somebody who joins your team, and away you go. But there's a big difference here, and that's really important because I think the the technology people are working hard on trying to bring together the best of both worlds, given the search index concept is more about fact, and the training data is not in the same way. Anyways, bringing the two together will actually help overcome a lot of the problems that you might see as time goes on. So the mental model that we came up with, this one was easy to find. There's lots of them out there, and I've done some work, and Adam's done some work, exploring a few of these with ChatGPT to just get a good explanation of how it works. So the simplest one is this idea of it's a statistical base. So if you ask it the question, the Northern Lights are a natural phenomenon caused by, and you ask an AI engine to go fill that out, basically what it's doing is it's looking in its training data and say, okay, well, I have lots of examples where that concept is talked about, and about 75% of the time, solar activity tends to be the next words that appear. 22% probability magic forces, and 0.01 people who've written about this just don't know what's going on. So with that as the outcropping, although in the indexing world, something similar could occur in terms of the final result, it tells you that it's not an absolute answer. Although 75% is heavily weighted, and it will say solar activity more often than not, it still could say the other ones, which is where you get a lot of the problems. So if you think of it, and I think we have a visual one, let me just see here. Oh yeah, sorry. So then the interesting part of it from my point of view is once the word is put down, solar activity, the whole probability calculation resets, and it revisits what words could be next, and it keeps doing that exercise. So it's not that unlike, stepping in a forest trying to follow a trail to get to the other end. You can only take it one step at a time, and every time you take one step, you have to look at your map again and figure out how to get to the next step. And you can make one mistake here, one mistake there, one mistake there, and before you know it, you're of course going in completely the wrong direction. And that's why and where you get a lot of the hallucinations and differentiation. So if you keep this sort of mental model in place, then you sort of get, it'll help us here in terms of the materials. Adam, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, if you could flip over the next slide or the next two slides. So this is a representation that I found useful when I was going down a rabbit hole one day. This is how you type something into a GPT, and this is what actually happens underneath the cover. So I'm always interested in how these things work. And on the left side, you'll see that in that first box, some tokens there. And that's how the computer is breaking it down. That's kind of the first step. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the highlighted things, and that's what it sees as the tokens. When you'll hear that terminology come up a lot is tokenization or tokens. And then the machine just translates that into the bottom row of numbers. And it really just is trying to predict the next number, which is one of the reasons why it's so fast and magical, is because it has millions and millions and millions of these that it can pull on and examples to pull from. But it really is probabilistic, as Stephen was saying. So it could essentially insert in there the magic forces response. Now, it's a little bit like throwing a dart, but after that last number 200 or 200266, it could literally put the number in for magic forces. And underneath the covers, you can kind of tune that and adjust the parameters, which I know Stephen's been playing with. You can adjust those things. So I'm always interested on how things are going, kind of underneath. So yeah.
That's how you wind up in the Harry Potter scene.
Yeah, right.
Magic courses, and
Yeah.
then suddenly the Northern Lights are at Hogwarts.
Yeah.
But that, it's an interesting concept for me when you look at it from that point of view, because the weight of the incorrect use of magic forces pulls in with a higher weight the next things that would occur when magic forces is actually in a phrase that might happen to have talked about lights in the sky. So now you've got magic forces, lights in the sky. Now you got UFO discussions happening, and now it's pulling in data from all kinds of other concepts in the training set to get you off on tangents. So I found, I think we both, anybody who's tried this, it's fun to do. It's fun to start pushing it in these boundaries, and then add all the other, crazy capabilities it could do, like talk different languages and tones and styles and everything else. You can get it to really be quite entertaining. It's
I
fun, right?
did
You
ask
can
it.
work with its humorous.
I was going to say, sorry, I did ask it who built the pyramids, and it didn't match my mental model. So, but no conspiracy theories or whatever.
Yeah.
It
Let's
didn't hallucinate enough for me.
yeah, yeah. Let's so charge ahead. So this slide, it's sort of a combination. On the left are some of the lessons I have from doing the POCs around InsideSpin, and on the right-hand side, some of the ones Adam has had. So maybe just Adam, maybe pick one, give you 30 seconds, talk a little bit about what you learned from it, good, bad, or ugly.
Yeah, I think the one out of my examples on the right-hand side there, the one that's blowing my mind the most is my ability to prototype quickly. And so I've worked with you before in many companies, Stephen, and I know how fast ideas can get generated. And Dan's also on the call. I know he's doing some of this. But the ability for me as an engineer who's product minded or product minded engineer, the ability for me to get a prototype out from just like some random idea. This is a very trivial example, but it's illustrative of a bigger thing, which is I've always wanted a Chrome extension to just Google the books at Toronto Public Library to save my wallet. And one night I happened to be sitting at the table, I was using Claude, and I said, write me an extension to query the Toronto Research or Toronto Library books. And it wrote it. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I've had a few moments like this in my career where I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be super powerful. And then that's kind of led me to do more and more complicated things. And I know Dan created an entire website with very little actual coding, and it looks great. He's creating a replacement for Jira as well. So that's to me the real unlock here, and this is why I think you're saying product management is a great role for this. So
I'm gonna pick an opposite one then, a negative.
yeah.
Although I've experienced that one too, and I've got my own little website project. But so what was really a sort of an annoying one for me is I was using it to help me build the integration with the OpenAI API underneath InsideSpin, and I wanted to understand how I could create a sustaining context, from session to session within OpenAI, and it was telling me all about this concept of messages and threads. So you create a thread, you put your prompts into the thread, they stay there forever, and away you go. And then it turned out it was starting to tell me features and functions that actually weren't there, but I'm busy programming. So I'm busy going away, creating code. It's giving me samples and I'm plugging them all in and they're failing. And I'm trying to debug what the heck's going on here. And then eventually I look outside of ChatGPT onto the standard web, and those features don't exist. And I laugh because this is a proof of concept and it is about learning. But I thought, holy cow, like, first of all, I wasted my time, but it was pretty convincing. So it was like, if you heard about the earlier story from, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, about the lawyer who went into court starting citing case law because it used an early version of AI, and the AI engine had just made up the case law and it went into court and got caught. I don't remember the outcome of that, but it's one of those examples. So it's just a reminder that it's not a perfect tool. You do have to know how to use it, and that's what we're going to do. So just for time, we got to sort of pick up the pace a little bit.
Yep.
So obviously a bunch of key takeaways. History tells us that we're still in the early stages of understanding the beast that we're building. And I say that from, that legacy of looking back from the 70s at all the transformational technologies. And although it's moving at a breakneck speed, it's still very early, and there's lots changing all the time as people are trying to solve the problem, the least of which is just making this singular technology globally usable, which has a huge scalability challenge that far exceeds just where cloud computing probably is. AI is based on the fundamentals of probability engines, so it amplifies patterns from training data. So that raises all the issues of what's in that training data. Is it biased in some way? If I create my own training data, I have to make sure I don't bring more bias into it, and so on. So there's not a lot of information that's available just for the general research to find out what's in the training data to get some understanding of whether or not it's biased. You sort of learn by asking questions. Randomization is built in at some level to encourage exploring alternatives. So one of the interesting parts of AI is you can get it to look at all kinds of angles at certain problems, and that's what you want. But when you're asking it to recreate something multiple times, hoping to get a similar output, that's not actually as predictable as you'd like, because it's almost by definition meant to look at different angles. So you wind up with, a benefit to, let's say, research science as being not a benefit to knowledge workers creating written materials. Amplifying common patterns. This is sort of a knock on it at some level, but there's the philosophical issue of AI, where if we're all largely basing ourselves on the same set of training data, then how do we create differentiation with all of the users? So everybody sort of rises up to a common element of the bottom, and then from there, there's no place to go because we're all basing everything on the same information. So we're all going to get the same or similar advice around how to be competitive and where the next feature should come from and so on. So, where can innovation still come from if not? So as a user, there's an even more premium on being a really good user in order to still stay ahead of where all this training data normalization would occur. And then the hallucination problem, which, is a problem if left unchecked, but does seem like a fairly solvable problem if you are really understanding what so-called prompt engineering is, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So end of first section. We took most of our time here, Adam, so let's pick up pace. Number two, acceptance of AI. This one's a little shorter. So this one, it's an interesting one. I think it should be true everybody on the call would have had some experience with this. Either you have a personal hesitance with acknowledging that you're using AI, or you use it, but you don't do anything, I'll say, to hide it, if that's the right way. Like I kind of laugh when you see people, cut and paste something out of one of the AI sessions, and I don't know if it still does this, but it used to always put star, 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 bullet, star, star, star as the way it cut and pasted by default, and someone would just paste that into their document, not realizing that the rest of their document had a different format. So it was sort of obvious what they did, and it just triggers you. Oh, okay, they didn't even bother to read it, which is more my comment, that they didn't bother to validate that what they got out of it was actually consistent with everything else they were doing. So they weren't hiding it, they were mistakenly not hiding it. And as a result, it kind of undermines things. So acceptance of AI is really important, and we're just going to talk about that briefly. So we're compensated for the value of our contributions as professionals. So does AI take some of this away? I would argue, I think most people in the industry agree, that if you become properly AI augmented, is one of the phrases, like the Borg, resources, or if you become an AI augmented resource, it's where the value equation for us as professionals is inevitably shifting to. And I think there's no way out of that one. Companies will be foolish not to use AI, expect all their employees to be really good at it, and the companies that spin the best experts into their organization around it will be the ones that are most productive and most able to deal with customer needs. Do we hide the use of AI and hide the productivity improvements that come from it? And I have some examples that I've worked on here. I'll show you shortly. I argue you should show that it can expand our contributions by using AI as the starting point of all our work products. Why not? If I could get it to do some outline for me way quicker than I could, and I save myself half a day, ideally I deploy that half a day on more value creation, and therefore when I finish that work product, it should be better. When you apply it to things like product management, there's an obvious benefit there. Do we really understand how it works to guide our emerging prompt engineering skills? If we don't, then we have a problem. So the next level of professional performance might end up being prompt engineering. When you look at performance reviews, and if you're an engineer, you might have in your performance review some criteria around your technical skills. Prompt engineering is clearly going to be one of those skills. People are going to be interviewed. If they're not already happening, and I know they are in many areas, you'll be asked to show how you can interact with AI. How smart are you to specify what it is you want and do it in a pretty scientific way in order to get the output that's looked for, so people can take risk on you using AI. The next gens growing up, our kids, they'll likely have AI as a staple of their tool set, as the current generation does with smartphones, GPS, and cloud. So that also is interesting because I know if you took GPS away from everybody today or smartphones, most people will be lost, including me. So that's also going to be true of AI. So however we get there, we better do what we can to make sure the next generation, grows up correctly. The sooner we ingest the benefits, the sooner we're ready for whatever the next transformations are. And that's a hard one to not want to believe in, meaning I don't want to have it take 20 years. Like we really need to get to the end of this pretty quickly because it's going to be so disruptive to so many things if you sort of look at the job market more broadly. If we push it underground or into deep cavities of specialized use, we make ourselves less competitive globally. That one's an unknown one in my mind. If we put AI in places where automation can happen and the automation goes bad, will that create regulation around the use of AI and end up just pushing it into some niche corners where it can be fairly well controlled? I actually think there's some legitimate risk of that, and I would also argue maybe even there should be some deliberate governance around it until we really understand it more and have proved it. But giving it automation control of anything may not yet be something it's ready for. So we have to watch the side effects of making mistakes, the so-called spontaneous disassembly message that SpaceX has, doesn't cause us to stop wanting to use AI. He just charges ahead and makes another spaceship and tries again. Conventionally, when these things fail, often they go the other way and they take 12 steps backwards. And it's not clear we're going to want that with AI, especially if we've let it consume part of the workforce. So it's silly not to use something that delivers value, much like smartphones, GPS, and cloud. So we should just go ahead and do it. We need to know how it works. We can't put the pin back in their grenade otherwise. So that's sort of my thing. Adam, comment.
I think I'm good on this one. I was going to suggest actually you show your website example because I really like how you're blending them together here. So
Okay.
you can talk to this or I can talk to it, but I
Yeah,
was
why
going
don't
to
you
say,
talk to it? You've seen it a few times, and I'll
yeah,
correct you if you misrepresent me.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how good my summarization skills are. So what Stephen did, he mentioned that he created this website that had summaries of the articles as placeholders, but you can see the little chat GPT icon here that you can click and get AI to finish your article for you. And then the text in blue, I believe, Stephen, is text that's been generated. I can't remember your color scheme. Green is chat GPT and blue is
Me. Yeah.
is you. So I really liked this as a kind of an innovative way to show that it's your thoughts combined with AI to kind of make a super article or super material. And I think this is really quite neat and unique. I haven't seen anyone else. It's either complete garbage like LinkedIn has become, right? Where it's all clearly Gen AI created, or it's people, writing their real thoughts out. And I really like the blend that you've done here.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm actually proud of that one. You can't steal that. That's my idea. But it was important because I was also curious. Right? I'm the author of the site, and part of my motivation was I really did want to understand, do I write good articles or not, and how
Right.
can I do that? And if I give it my summary, I want most of it to be an expansion of the concept of the summary. So I would
Yeah.
be quite prepared to make more effort in writing better summaries, but I'm too lazy to go create the whole article. So if I
Yeah.
could show that it's still, for me, even if I could show to me that it's pulling it in properly,
Yeah.
I'd be happy. Now, I don't know how it's making these decisions
Yeah.
internally, but I asked it to do this and it did it. And I went, holy cow, like that's actually pretty clever. And I'm taking it at face value that it's a reasonable representation of things.
Your whole process as you worked through this and as you're explaining it to me and it's writing the code and inserting the tags for you and then we got into a discussion one day about, well, how do you know when you should stop generating? Or what if you generate 5, 10 versions, where you have the arrow drawn? If I click it and Dan clicks it and Rob Saab clicks it and Manju clicks it, we all who's got the best version of the article? We want to save that one and keep it for later. So there was some real exploration going on here. It was fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah. So just more detail on what Adam was saying. So once I discovered early on that I was getting variation, I thought, how many articles do I have to generate before I exhaust the variation? And then given ChatGPT or underlying AI can merge articles together and synthesize them, then if I were to generate all the variations and then synthesize them, I'd get a super article. And I implemented that. So that's actually now live in the website. And then I created a way to mark an article as the definitive one, in which case it stops generating it. So if more users come to the site, it doesn't take time to generate it. Each one takes about 20 seconds to generate, give or take a bit. So that was an exercise. And that's also where ChatGPT gave me very incorrect advice about how the API works, which I was pretty pissed on because I really wanted this to work exactly the way I had envisioned it. Then I found out I'd been wasting my time programming it the wrong way.
I was actually going to suggest that we jump over to section 4 and leave section 3.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Let me there we are, 4.
So we just skipped a section on hallucinations. Your arrow's still on the screen. Can you take it?
It's
That's all right. Don't worry about it. I can talk
that's a Zoom area. There we are. Annotations. You start, Adam.
Yeah. So Stephen mentioned, and given that Stephen most recently employed me as a product manager, it's a little weird to be talking about this. But we were starting to bring AI into the organization that we were a part of, and we were experiencing some of these things that where people didn't know what to do with it. They were naturally skeptical. They weren't technology thinking people. Stephen, if you could just load all the bullets for me. And you know, this was roughly a year ago where we were doing this, and of course, me being curious, I was starting to try all different kinds of techniques. Like I created an explainer video of the product we were building, and I gave it to the company to kind of build some raw. But the one that really got me, and I mentioned this earlier, is just expediting or speeding up the experimentation, and how I can take an idea on my own from concept to clickable, workable code in no time flat now. Whereas before, I'd have a meeting with Steven and Dan. We were working with Dan too, and then I'd have to go and I'd have to, you know, massage what I was hearing, and then I'd have to go to Dan's team and put it in the sprint, and you know, all the things. And I really think this is a huge unlock. For me, writing the PRD or formatting the PRD, something that I've really found enhances, but nothing has been as groundbreaking as being able to say, you know, I want this, and then see it, you know, a few minutes later. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about this piece. I think all product managers should be getting up to speed on this. And I like Steven's, I think you've come, I haven't seen that, like AI augmented, which is going to be a tongue twister for me, but being an AI augmented PM, I think is going to be the future.
Yeah, and I chose this here on the image side, unlike the other slides where we had, you know, counterpoint for each one. They really all just mean there's just one thing. Like you got to get with it. It's such an important role. It's my favorite role in technology. I mean, I enjoyed being a CEO as well, but it's my favorite role overall. It's at the center of many things, and I think you're also starting to see some emergence that you know, the product role as it's conventionally defined, and the CTO role and a core engineering role are really merging now, because the overlap is this type of life cycle, and the ability for the triad of those 3 roles to functionally work together as an AI augmented triad in order to support what a company can do. And then, you know, the nature of the underlying engineer to produce the output will also change a lot, because there's so many clever things you can do with code generation. You could dramatically speed things up. You can dramatically break things too, which, just like my articles, I can get the wrong article, you know, you can get the wrong code. And of course, you don't know that until the customers touch it and exceed what you might have been able to do with testing. So, you know, that's where the sword is, or the edge of the sword is.
Yeah.
I got more slides here for you, Adam.
Yeah, so this one, I mean, this gentleman, I've been following him on LinkedIn for a long time, and hopefully it's big enough to see. It says the website's product growth, but you know, he this came across my LinkedIn feed, and this matches my experience in terms of what generative AI is good for, and where I like to use it. Obviously, I've honed in on this simple prototyping, but he's talking about the how reliable is it? What's your confidence in using this, that it's going to get the thing right? So, I've used it for, I haven't used it for Excel formulas. That was a new one, but SQL queries, definitely I've used it for code. I've done a ton of debugging, and charts and prototyping, drafting things, LinkedIn posts. But for me, I'm finding the edges around, as Stephen has, creating anything that needs spelling or counting. It's terrible at those things. So if you need anything spelled properly, it's not great for that. So
We will, yeah. Well, we skipped over the supercalifragilistic example.
yeah, well, yeah, yeah,
I'm going to skip this. Just in general, it's a sort of a money pit problem, as I mentioned in my original documentation example. You're creating artifacts that have no lifespan to them. You're spending a lot of time and money on creating those artifacts. So you want to get through that whole process much more quickly so that as the artifacts expire, you're not trying to maintain them or even know that they're out of date. So there's a lot to be done here for the product manager and the product marketing managers to become AI augmented in order to save on some of this money pit. Adam?
this was a section that I found. I listened to the CEO of Anthropic do a podcast on Lex Friedman. It's quite long, at like 3 hours or something like that, but I was engaged through the whole thing. And then when I investigated Claude, they actually talked about a lot of things that I did in my early career at Platespin around defining your success criteria. And I was doing it through the lens of testing and software quality. If you could go to the next one, Stephen, like they have examples, and this, it just brought me back to my testing time. Is it, what's a good test, and what's a bad test? Like, well, the model should classify sentiments well. Like, yeah, obviously. What does that really mean? And so we used to do things like that. Like when we're moving operating systems around a data center, what does it mean for an OS to work? Like, we actually had to answer that question. It wasn't enough for it to boot and you'd be able to log in. You had to make sure all the things underneath the operating system were working too, and nothing broke. And so Anthropic, the next slide, Stephen, is a, oh, it's okay. I thought there was another one. It's okay. They have a whole list of success criteria for AI adoption. And to me, Rob Saab, who's on the call, taught me some of these things in the context of quality back in the day, but now it's being applied to AI, and it's coming full circle for me. So I find it really interesting.
Let me just, oh, yeah. So on the takeaways, I was talking with Adam earlier. We could create an exhaustive list, but really in the end, the takeaway is if you're in product in any way, shape, or form, you have to become AI augmented, and that's really the takeaway. So we'll sort of leave it on that. Maybe the last one, prompt engineering, I think we can go through pretty quickly. This is one where I'm guessing our audience here doesn't necessarily need as much of this, but it is surprising. I don't think, despite all of what I've done so far over the last couple months, to be hands-on with this at a fairly deep level, I guess, I still feel I don't fully understand how far I could go or even need to go, or the impact of how far I go would be on performance and the output without more experimentation. I think we've both learned that it is a science. Sorry, it's an art as well, because most sciences are still pretty much art, but it is a science, and it does follow many of the disciplines of engineering, product management, requirement specifications, the concept of precision, proper communication, surrounding things with, don't go there statements. When you ask ChatGPT how to solve hallucination problems, that's often what it recommends, is it tells you that you need to tell ChatGPT what it shouldn't do. And that's how you, over time, constrain the hallucination challenge. So prompt engineering is, again, it's not like search. You don't just put in 5 words and get a result. You actually have to surround your original inquiry with all the constraints that tell you, if it met all these constraints, I'm getting good output. I'm getting quality output that I can depend on, in which case I could, promote it to the next step in my process. So, this is a really great one. I love the whole idea here. And educationally, there's a lot to do here. People like Adam and I and others happy to go into teams and work with teams to improve their adoption of AI and help reveal some of the things that may apply to them and the misconceptions they're making by just using it, closing their eyes and doing the whole things with eyes wide shut, are just not going to work for them. So clarity and precision, context awareness, iteration and refinement, understanding the behavior of AI, domain expertise, prompt structuring, knowing how to manage bias and hallucination, and leveraging advanced features, which is another one, because when you go through the front ends, the advanced features aren't necessarily as revealing or revealed as they are if you're going through the API. But through the API, there's a lot more structure to it, which is kind of useful, that you can construct your prompt with system commands as well as user commands, and you put them together to make it all work. Whereas in ChatGPT, you don't have that particular experience. So there's a lot to know. Why should we not view prompt engineering as a new skill that we need is kind of my take on all of this when I look at the industry. If companies are hesitating to talk about it that way, I think they're missing the point. Even though there is an analogy with hiring, it is a skill, and it is a skill everybody in the organization needs. And you'll see when we get to the sort of final takeaway. This one kind of spins back around to our responsibilities as a society to bring the youth up with the right educational skills that they need. And you can almost argue it can be prompt engineering. You wouldn't call it prompt engineering, but the fundamentals of clarity and precision, context awareness, refinement, understanding behavior, domain expertise. I mean, that's basically what you're supposed to teach people at school to do about whatever subject that they want to be best at. So there's some interesting places AI could take us if we fully embody it.
Just a quick time check for you.
Yep.
3 minutes left on the clock.
Okay. So high accuracy, high precision, low accuracy, low precision. I think that's pretty obvious. The last takeaway here, which is sort of, I think mostly about how I've been thinking about this more than anything, but we're sort of, in my mind, this is really creating an opportunity for us to realize what the modern educational framework should look like. Maybe we just look at that professionally, fine. But when you look at it from a schooling point of view, there are some fundamental skills that people need to do well with AI that they really need to learn at school, starting from the youngest of ages. And that's how they'll grow up knowing how to use this technology well. Today, we've, I think, failed many, many young people by not properly teaching them how to use smartphones and all the arguments you have about them being distractions and everything else. Whereas, Adam and I have both been part of a school. You realize that actually the problem is we're not embracing it correctly in the school setting and teaching people how to use it as a proper tool, not to hide it as a dangerous tool. Well, I mean, AI must be driving schools crazy because it's probably quite easy for students to fool teachers in using AI to do their homework, and they're never going to win that battle. You never do. My last comment here for me, business leadership at its best is an intersection of many kinds of experiences to take great ideas and turn them into thriving businesses with excellence. So AI is added to the mix. It's not a replacement for all of this. You bring it into your organization, you bring it into your team. You may, if you're lucky, find ways to save resources. That probably means there were other things you didn't do very well in your organization. But if you accelerate your ability for the organization to pursue its vision, then you'll have more than a 10% return on that. You'll have an order of magnitude return on that. So even if you don't save cost on people, you'll be able to do way more with these people if they're all properly AI augmented. The original 5 takeaways we had still there. Make sure you understand it. We skipped over a little bit more of hallucinations, but the deck's available if anybody wants to look at it. If you're in a product role, please accept the notion that your role is the most important. And if you can, flip the 80-20 rule around and spend most of your time on strategy and other high impact things for your business instead of the kind of often mundane things that product managers do. That's a great thing. And then I got this kind of out of a ChatGPT session a little bit. Your eyes are closed when you're just treating it the way you see it on a lot of the posts everywhere. It's a doomsday thing. It's overpromising. It's got a lot of jargon around it. It's got morality issues, and you just don't think there's any risk. These are all the things you can't do, especially from a business point of view, because you'll definitely suffer from it. And that's that. Holy cow, 1 hour on the button, but that means there's no time for questions. But there can be. So I'm happy to stay if anybody does, and so happens to have some time to stay. If anybody wants to contribute anything, I think we'd enjoy some extra conversations. I don't know, Dan, if you're
Afternoon, Adam.
still have some
This,
time. Yep, sorry, Manju.
yeah, I'm not a software engineer, so I'm more of a generalist trying to learn how to use AI in my life, right? And this has been an eye-opening and definitely helpful session. And in the future, if it's possible, it'll be amazing to show some prompt engineering examples. I think that's where, you know, we know we need to use AI, and it's garbage in, garbage out, right? And that's what I think the next session would be amazing. Some
We,
examples of prompt engineering.
we'll take that as a vote.
No, that's great. Thanks, Andrew. The Stephen's point that he had and talking about the difference between search, the way that we've been trained to search, and a lot of us, I believe I've perfected search and I know all the little keyboard, the shortcuts to add plus and quotes and knots and Boolean logic. Like I find myself bringing that over to the Gen AI space. Yesterday, I was trying to create a video for use in an interview case study, and it was terrible. Like I was like, oh my God, it's not coming up with anything like what I have in my mind. So I had to sit and write out and I had to think and describe in more words than just keyword search. And it's causing me to reorient myself. It's quite interesting. So yeah, I'd love to do a session on that.
We had, if you want to hear a little bit more about the history of life. So in a strange kind of way, so I worked for 10 years for this company called Fulcrum, which in its heyday was a leader in search technology prior to Google. And we did something that was interesting that you don't see too often, the dog food experiment. So because we were a search engine company, we had search technology fully integrated into many aspects of the way our business ran in ways that were surprising. We had our code repository searchable from our own technology. And I had integrated the search technology directly into the code editor we were using. So that while you were coding, you could do queries and pull code segments in. If you were, changing variables, it was easy to find all the occurrences. Obviously, nowadays those are easy to do with today's tools, but search was so integral to what we did, and we were all experts at it. When I left Fulcrum, and I realized nobody was using search anywhere, it was like a helpless experience. Now I'm coming into it, and I have like quite a deep understanding of how search works, and we had done some work with what was called vector space similarity searching at the time, sort of a bit of a precursor to certain aspects of the way AI works. And it's interesting to see the progress because back then the challenge was the horsepower to scale the algorithm to work at the level of training data that it has didn't exist. In our case, we'd have a 2 GB index. That was about as big as the index could be before the engine wouldn't work anymore. If we had had unlimited resources back then, we might have been able to build things that are similar to what we have today based on that kind of technology, because it was an approximation algorithm. It was statistically trying to find, a relevance match between your query and the contents of its knowledge base based on an indexed concept to produce your search result. And it was very accurate in its heyday. So it's sort of fun to do that. So many people don't know how to use search properly, and I kind of laugh when I see the limits what you could do with Google. Although the type ahead feature is like the most amazing thing I've ever seen, that they could implement that working the way it does. But anyways,
young developers these days, they've got type ahead right in the IDE.
yeah. Sometimes when you in Word and PowerPoint and all that, it actually gets in the way most of the time. But anyways, other comments, other things.
Dan had come off mute, but I don't know if he intended to.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Dan, share a bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, all makes sense. When I was doing that little POC that Adam mentioned, I guess a few things. Anyone's built a product from like the first line of code, just getting some of the boilerplate stuff out of the way, that I found that really helped. So API layer, kind of database layer, kind of defining all that, picking which libraries you want to use, getting it all set up. I think you still need to know what it's, or know enough about what you're building and about the technology to know what it spits out is actually quality code or not. So I think that's one thing where, at least in the short term, maybe not, it'd be more of augmenting people's input and the work they're doing rather than replacing them. It would hopefully make you more productive. The other thing around prototyping, I gave myself a budget of $50 and 1 week to build a website and beginnings of an app. So I mean that was pretty impressive, not for me, but for more of the tools that were available. So I thought that was quite interesting. So yeah,
How much did you wind up spending, and how long did it actually take?
No, it was, I basically stopped after that.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah,
I didn't know
but I
if you
mean, you saw the website, you saw the app. I mean, with a little bit more work and focusing on specific features and like prioritizing those as you normally would, then it wouldn't be to kind of keep improving it. But I think there's enough task management tools out there, so I'll probably put that one to bed.
I thought Dan had the precursor to Down with Jira. That's all I can. It's Down with Jira. That's it. But
in my own experience, so I'm going through that exercise now, Dan, trying to build something that's standalone for something as a sort of a bit of a successor at InsideSpin. Anyways, so I've been pretty impressed because it's paced me around the implementation. Like, do you want to do the wire? I gave it my requirements. First question was, would you like us to do or like me to do the wireframes? I said, sure. So it gave me five or six, responses to post into different pages, bring them up. Look at that. It's got some, nice context. What would you like to do next? Would you like to work on the database layer? Here's the things you should put in your app. And so I went through that, got it all up, and that's pretty cool. Then I think it got a little lazy, and it said, here's a change to the styles. Go change this part of the style of the CSS file rather than regenerating the whole thing. Now, I know I could have asked it to, but then I started to realize I have to make sure I don't touch it, because if I tamper with it, it won't know what the changes that I made. And if I take its whole file, it'll overlay it. So as I made changes, I started to tell it what the changes were. Like I renamed the extensions from HTML to PHP. Okay, I got it. And then on after, it generated, all the right links were PHP links instead of HTML links. And I thought, okay, I'm going to enjoy this. And then before I signed off, I said, are you going to save this? Yep, don't worry, it'll be here next time.
yeah.
My little buddy, it's doing work for me, I was pretty happy. So it was pretty impressive, although it did make mistakes and it did occasionally forget something, or it didn't apply changes consistently or give me an impact. Like it made a change here that it also needed to go change it over there. I had to tell it the other page didn't, change the style.
Yeah, I found that a lot, where you have to be pretty explicit around, yeah, I didn't want you to just make this change in one file. I wanted you to make it across the entire application.
Which once you get to know that, that's okay. I can handle that. So
there's a question there. Any suggestions to communicate AI knowledge and capabilities in PM job applications and interviews? I just had an interview this morning at 11:30 where I had to do some of this stuff, and I wasn't sure whether they wanted to know if I used AI or not. That's a great question. Stephen, what do you think?
Well, so I'll give you both answers. They should be obvious given what we've said here. You would like to believe that you should proudly display how you've interpreted using AI in your role, because it should be true that the company you would interview with would be interested in that. And if you get caught off guard the wrong way on that question, then you might be interpreted as someone who's hiding the fact you might be claiming to do your job with AI. So that's the first thing. I would ask, I think maybe, Lynn, the interesting part of interviewing when I've been on the side of being the interviewer is I like when people ask me questions in an interview rather than they just expect me to ask them the core, the canned questions. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about this. So you may want to start early on by asking them about what their AI strategy is in order to give you some, some sound bites that you could use to decide how to, on the fly, describe, how you would apply AI during that rest of the interview. So get them to tell you their corporate strategy. You can be bold if it's product and say, I'm as fast as I can, I'm learning how to make me more productive by using AI. What's your company strategy? Are you at the beginning of that, the middle of that, the end of that? What do you see? Because it can do all these things, and use those cues to sort of help you gauge how to do the rest of the interview. I've always enjoyed candidates who, do what they can to learn what they need to learn to have a great interview. And one way to do that is to be inquisitive. And you're a product person, so in theory, you should be inquisitive anyways, because you're supposed to talk to all of your stakeholders regularly. And you should show that skill, so you kind of get a bunch of points all at once for that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. We are past our time. All I can do, I think, here is post the links to this on the same LinkedIn thing that I did with the event. So you'll have to look for it that way, or ping Adam or I directly, and we'll get you the YouTube link. And if you want a PDF of the slides, we can leave that somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where to share that, but we can put that in somewhere. Thank you very much. We've had one request for a follow-up, so we'll see if we do one on prompt engineering. And other than that, as I say, if you need you're in an organization where you want to talk, you want us to talk to people, both Adam and I would be happy to engage more formally with organizations to help share some of these insights if you feel the organization is behind and needs some, in a way, non-mainstream outsiders, but people with lots of industry experience to come in. We'd be happy to do that. Dan, thanks for your comments. Always great to see colleagues around that we've worked on. Have a great day, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Stop.